Hello everyone, I'm Kathy Myers. I'm a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a volunteer speaker for Pennsylvanians for Human Life. Our mission at Pennsylvanians for Human Life is education services. We're dedicated to the protection of human life from conception to natural death. And today we're also going to talk a little bit about the humanity of the child. We're going to go through some of the different stages of development. We're also going to talk about legislation, state legislation, federal legislation. We're going to hear some stories of women who have actually had abortions and some of the abortion procedures. So we're so glad that you could be with us today. You are our hope. You are our future. We know you're going to turn this thing around once and for all because your generation gets it. Many of you have your own ultrasound picture and your own baby book. You know that life begins at conception. But just to just reiterate that for you a little bit so that you can share this information and educate some of your friends that might not know as much as you're going to know by the time you get done with this presentation. There was a symposium that happened in 1981, and the report, I'm going to read this part to you, that the Human Life Bill is what it was called, summarized it this way: physicians, biologists, and other scientists agree that conception marks the beginning of a human being, a being that is alive and a member of the human species. There is overwhelming agreement on this point in countless medical, biological, and scientific writings. The answer to a crisis pregnancy is to eliminate the crisis, not the child. And if anything good can come of this tragic situation that's been going on for the last 48 years, it's that now we have more places that can help women in crisis, women experiencing an unplanned pregnancy, than abortion clinics. So that's a very good thing. Everybody has really stepped up. There's so many marvelous organizations ready to help, running on a shoestring budget, not getting $500 million from the federal government, and they're just working so hard, and many lives have been saved. But we still have work to do, and that's where you come in. We have some beautiful pictures of all the progress that you made inside your mother's womb for all those 9 months. On day one, that was the day when the sperm from your father and the egg from your mother fused together. And that was a magnificent, miraculous moment. That's when your sex was determined. That's when all of your DNA, that was the blueprint for who you are. The gifts and the talents and the traits of all of your family members come into being, and you are unrepeatable. You're not like anybody else that there ever was. Now, on month one, we're going to talk about the fact that your heart started beating. It actually started beating at about 21 days after your conception. Your mother doesn't even really realize that she's pregnant yet. She knows she's awful tired. She knows she has a voracious appetite, but she's thinking, what's going on here? But maybe it didn't even occur to her what's really going on, but you're there and things are happening. And then if we go to slide number 2, dancing is the title of this slide, but you have so much room. You actually are in a pool of amniotic fluid and you're swimming around like a little fish and you have all this room, and she probably doesn't feel that yet, but she's starting to put things together. Could I possibly be pregnant? And then month 3, I can suck my thumb now. Now you're getting a little bit bigger, but actually you resemble a perfectly formed little human being. Nobody could really deny that. So you can suck your thumb, you're swimming around, you have a unique set of fingerprints that belong only to you. If you were to grasp an object, you could clutch onto it pretty well. It's amazing what's going on. And by now, I'm sure your mom's had a pregnancy test and she knows. In fact, what she's probably doing is thinking, boy, I wonder when that happened, and counting ahead for 9 months, trying to figure out about when you're going to make your appearance on the scene, when your birthday is going to be. Now, month number 4, I had a dream today. Sounds a little bit like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., doesn't it? But it's actually REM sleep, which REM stands for rapid eye movement. You actually are dreaming in there in your mother's womb. Mommy felt me kick today is month number 5. Can you imagine? Now she feels these little tiny flutters like a butterfly, and she's so happy. She knew you were there, but now it's confirmed. You're going to make your appearance felt. Now we're at month number 6. I'm sitting up straight now. In the 6th month, the baby's oil and sweat glands are functioning and help regulate the body temperature. There's a white filmy layer that covers the body and protects the delicate skin. Everything that has to do with this pregnancy is so well thought out by our Creator. It's just amazing. We could go on for hours and hours on just every single month and what is happening. Let's go to slide number 7. I looked around today. You can actually see a few things that are going on in that womb of your mother's. It's probably pretty dark. There is a time when your eyes are going to close and they won't open again until it's time to make your appearance in our world. Month number 8, I like to listen to my mommy's voice. Did you know that if your mother had a favorite singer, or maybe she had a favorite soap opera and there's music that plays at the beginning, they've actually done tests on babies where when they play that music, the baby smiles and recognizes it. It's amazing how much they're really taken in. And even maybe a little sister or brother's voice, if that's the case in your family, they would recognize that. And then, of course, the 9th month, here I am. Such an exciting time. Everybody is cheering and happy and thrilled and wondering, what are you going to name this baby? But the sad truth of it is, in our country, if this preemie were still in the womb, it would be 100% legal to kill him. Unbelievable. So this is why we're here. We want to talk to you about all these things that are so important. Roe versus Wade was a Supreme Court decision made on January 22nd, 1973, and it was determined that the human offspring are not persons in the whole sense at any time before birth. Can you imagine they could say such a thing? That is just unbelievable. The unborn child is property of the woman. What about the father? First of all, I want to tell you that a lot of people will tell you, it's my body. I can do what I want with my body. But this is a totally separate human being. This little baby has 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 chromosomes from dad. As we said, it's a completely different arrangement of chromosomes than were in the mom and in the dad. They got a little bit of everything now. And it's just not possible to think that this child is part of that mother. It's residing in the womb of the mother for 9 months, but it's not like an extra arm or an extra leg. This is a unique and unrepeatable new human being. There never has been before, and there never will be again a child just like this one. And our world needs every single child with all their gifts and talents to share. Roe versus Wade continued, just said pregnancy is considered 3 trimesters. So the first trimester, they decided that abortion is allowed for any reason. That is just so heartbreaking to think that, you know, if the parent's not quite sure that they want that particular gender, or if it's just too inconvenient of a time, or a million different reasons is why people decide that they just cannot bring this child into the world. The second trimester, abortion is allowed if done for a medical reason by a doctor or a hospital. Sadly, you can usually find a doctor that'll determine a medical reason why maybe this child shouldn't be brought into this world. One thing that's going on now so often is genetic testing, where a lot of times they do different tests, which tests are not infallible. I could tell you story after story where parents were told one thing or another was going to be happening to their child, and it never came to fruition. So another thing that they determined on this second trimester, the medical reason they wanted to say is, or emphasize, is financially that you can't handle a child, or maybe emotionally you're just not ready. That's so ridiculous. There are so many available agencies, people, family members, neighbors, even people that you've never met before. I happen to volunteer for an organization called Birthright, and we have everything covered. If you don't have enough money, if you need health insurance, if the father doesn't think that he wants to pay child support, if you need a lawyer, if you need anything, you name it, a place to live, you name it. We'll take care of that for you. This is the 21st century. There's nothing we can't handle. That's absolutely no excuse. And the third trimester allowed only if the woman is a victim of rape or if her life or health is in danger. Well, when you think about a rape situation, it's the most devastating situation a woman will ever go through in her whole life. But we do have to remember Who is the criminal in this situation? And who's really getting the death penalty? Think about that for a little while. Well, look at this headline. Lyndon Johnson, 36th President of the United States, was dead. That was the top headline. And this is how I think Roe versus Wade became the law of the land. There were so many people that didn't even see this on the horizon. It kind of happened, and it became the second headline. The High Court rules abortions legal in the first 3 months. Well, because what really happened is 9 unelected judges made this determination that privacy, the right to privacy, a right for a woman to make this decision on her own, was more important than a child's right to life. And judges are appointed. They're not elected. They're actually supposed to study legislation and clarify it and interpret it. They're not supposed to make legislation. We have legislators in the House of Representatives and in the Senate that make and write legislation. They have been elected by us. They're the ones who are supposed to take care of determining if a law is appropriate. And the judges are just supposed to interpret it. But this was an activist court. They decided that they weren't quite sure when life begins. So they were talking about it. Is it the first trimester? Is it the second trimester? They decided that it was okay for a woman to make that decision completely on her own, and the father is left completely out of it. We'll talk about that a little bit later. By the time Roe versus Wade was decided, Norma McCorvey is the name of the person who actually was involved in that case. That was her real name. They changed it to Jane Roe. You've probably watched a lot of these CSI type shows where if they don't quite, they make up a name like John Doe. So they gave her the name Jane Roe. If a case is going to be making headlines and it's going to be discussed for years to come, sometimes the person in the case will want a name change so that after the case has been decided, they can go back to their normal life. Well, she was manipulated and used by the people around her. As one of us, when we're in a stressful situation, she had one child already. Her husband had left her, and she found herself pregnant with a second child. It's human. Sometimes we say things we don't mean. She said, "I wish I could have an abortion." At that time in the United States, there were a few states where you could have a legal abortion. Not too many, but Texas is where she lived, and that was not allowed in Texas. So there was a lawyer named Sarah Weddington who decided that if Norma McCorvey wanted to have this abortion, she should be able to do that. So she took on the case and said, "We'll bring this all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to," which they did. But you know what? For as much as we want to have a speedy trial in our justice system, that's not what really happens. It only takes 9 months for a woman to have a baby, and she was already pregnant. So by the time this baby was born, that case hadn't been decided quite yet, so Norma McCorvey never even had an abortion. There was another case that was decided that same day called Doe versus Bolton, and that was another mother whose case came to the Supreme Court, and that's where they determined that financially or emotionally, if you couldn't handle a baby, that's why you could have an abortion during the second trimester, or month 4, 5, and 6. And of course, the rape situation from month 7, 8, and 9. That's why it's allowed now to have an abortion at any time during any of those 9 months. And it's been 48 years since January 22nd, 1973. The National Right to Life Committee, the nation's oldest pro-life organization, says it reached an estimated 62 million abortions by tracking data from the Centers for Disease Control and the Guttmacher Institute, which previously served as a research arm of the nation's preeminent abortion provider, Planned Parenthood. Roe versus Wade legalized abortion on demand throughout the whole 9 months of pregnancies. So the National Right to Life Committee, the nation's oldest pro-life organization, said it reached an estimated 62,502,904 by tracking data from the Centers for Disease Control and the Guttmacher Institute, which previously served as a research arm of the nation's preeminent abortion provider, Planned Parenthood. Just look at this map of the United States and try to imagine that the whole Northeast just fell into the ocean, and now all of these people are missing. So we've lost over 62 million people. Just think about that for a little while. These are people that could have been scientists and lawyers and doctors and teachers and athletes and comedians, maybe a possible spouse for you, neighbors, cousins, all kinds of people that our world desperately needs. They were going to be part of our world. They were going to make our life better. We've done that to ourselves. These 9 unelected judges who really weren't supposed to be making law, they were supposed to be interpreting law, made up a right from the Constitution that doesn't exist, that a woman's right to privacy is her ultimate right, and she should have the right to determine to end the life of her own child. But I want to take one moment to say to you also, please don't think that in any way we are judging any young woman who has actually experienced abortion. Roe versus Wade legalized abortion on demand throughout the full 9 months of pregnancy. The National Right to Life Committee, the nation's oldest pro-life organization, said it reached an estimate of 62,502,904 by tracking data from the Centers for Disease Control and the Guttmacher Institute, which previously served as a research arm for the nation's preeminent abortion provider, Planned Parenthood. Look at this map of our United States. Oh, can you imagine 62 million people missing our future, our hope, all these children that we're missing? So just to review a little bit, when is abortion allowed for any reason? Think about that for a minute. What does the Supreme Court determine that human offspring to be before birth? And last, how many babies aborted since 1973? Just a little review, because these statistics are pretty unbelievable. So we want to make sure you think about them a little bit. We in Pennsylvania had what we call the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act. And in 1989, it was sponsored by Representative Steve Friend, and it's called the Informed Consent Bill. And these are just common sense suggestions that, thank goodness, after about 5 years of wrangling, became the law in Pennsylvania. The Informed Consent Bill required a 24-hour waiting period, which is only normal. No life-changing decision like terminating the life of a child should be done quickly. Sadly, we once had a speaker who, as part of her story, told us that in New Jersey it was allowed to do that. She made an impulsive decision and has regretted it ever since. So 24-hour waiting period to think about a decision like this, that makes sense. Parental consent of one parent of a minor. Anybody under 18 should not be making a decision as serious as this by themselves. So if they are under 18, definitely one of the parents should be informed. Information about alternatives to abortion. Risks of abortion and gestational age of the unborn baby must be given. There's a book published by the state with detailed information that must be available. I must admit, I spend a lot of time in front of Planned Parenthood, and I try to convince these young women that there are alternatives, but I rarely, if ever, have seen that book. There's nobody to enforce these rules, unfortunately. But it does make good common sense, and the 24-hour waiting period is enforced by the health department. A quote from Dr. Bernard Nathanson, a former abortionist: "Fewer women would have abortions if wombs had windows." Well, in the beginning of his career, and he alone is responsible for over 60,000 abortions, really thought he was doing women a favor. He really had told himself that. But when the scales fell off of his eyes, when he saw an ultrasound picture of his own child, all of a sudden he became pro-life, and he realized the error of his ways. He actually was one of the people that appeared in court when they were deciding Roe versus Wade at different times throughout history since it began, that he admitted that he just pulled a number out of the sky to determine how many women had died from an illegal abortion. I am deeply troubled by my own increasing certainty that I have in fact presided over 60,000 deaths. There is no longer serious doubt in my mind that human life exists from the very onset of pregnancy, is what he said after he saw the light. And despite claims to the contrary, legalized abortion was not responsible for the decline in the abortion-related deaths. It was medical advances, antibiotics, ICUs that produced a decline in the number of abortion-related deaths. In 1972, 39 women died from illegal abortions. In 1973, there were still 25 deaths from legal abortion, so it didn't really change all that much. U.S. women who have had abortions, 6 in 10 already have a child. 58% are in their 20s. 73% are religiously affiliated. 69% are economically disadvantaged. And when do women have abortions? 88% of abortions occur in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. Would you still be pro-choice if you were the one being chosen? There's a well-known comedian, Jim Gaffigan. He says, don't let an unplanned pregnancy force you to choose abortion. Pregnant women are either too young, they're too old, if it's too soon after another pregnancy, if she's going to get in trouble at work, she's too poor, she's too rich, she's too successful, she's too skinny, she's too fat, she's too crazy, too busy, too single, too married. There's just so many reasons that people think this is an appropriate decision. There's no difference between a first, second, or third trimester abortion or infanticide. It's all the same human being in different stages of development. I finally got to the point where I couldn't look at those little bodies anymore. That was a quote from Dr. Arnold Halperin, a former abortionist. And as we said when we were going through those stages of development, everything you need is right there. You need a safe place to be, you need nourishment, and you need love. Sadly, the mother's womb is one of the most dangerous places in the world right now. We tried to avoid the women seeing the fetus. They always wanted to know the sex, but we lied, and we told them it was too early to tell. It's better for the women to think of the fetus as an it. And that's Norma Eidelman, an abortion clinic worker, who said that. Let's review a few questions. Explain in your own words, what does the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act require? We talked about common sense. What is responsible for the decline of abortions, related deaths, legalized abortion, or medical advances? These are essay questions, so they all require a little bit of extra thought. And what is the difference between a first, second, or third trimester abortion and infanticide? I'd like to tell you about Arlene. Arlene was a sophomore in college. She was the first person in her family to attend college, and her parents were very proud of her. She became pregnant, and her only thought was how disappointed her parents would be, so she decided to abort. It was a Friday afternoon, and the curette, which is the tool used for abortion, slipped, and her uterus was perforated. The doctor denied it and gave her extra pain meds. She returned to the dorm as the weekend progressed. She developed a very high fever. Her roommate called 911, and she was delirious when she arrived at the hospital. She told the doctor she had no idea why she had a fever. She ended up having exploratory surgery and woke up the next morning with her parents at her bedside and was told she had had a hysterectomy. She spent the next 10 years earning graduate degrees in education. She read about the brand new support group called Silent No More and realized that there were many post-abortive women suffering as she was. She drove to Harrisburg that year and held a sign, "My abortion hurt me." 40 years later, Arlene still suffers from depression, but she's courageous. She exactly is doing what we would hope anybody in her situation would do, is to try and prevent what happened to her from happening to anybody else. There's a couple of other situations we're going to mention. Gianna Jensen and another person by the name of Melissa Oden. They both had what we used to call a saline abortion, and they were survivors. A saline abortion or installation abortion. An installation abortion refers to any abortion where medication is injected or instilled into the uterus, either inside or outside the amniotic sac that holds the fetus. Then the chemical abortion, the RU-486, this method involves 2 sets of medications that are administered to a pregnant individual. These pills are taken in order to end the viable pregnancy and expel the pregnancy after it has ended. And right in our own backyard, sadly, there was a man named Kermit Gosnell. A movie's been made about him. Scattered throughout in cabinets, in the basement, in a freezer, in jars, in bags, in plastic jugs were fetal remains. It was a baby Charnel house, which means house of death. This person was doing illegal late-term abortions. A late-term abortion is when the baby is much more fully developed, it's much more difficult, it's much more expensive, and it's not allowed in any or all abortion clinics. Even though we say abortion is allowed through all the 9 months. It is a much more intricate procedure. But the health department would never investigate, even though they had had many complaints, because the powers that be in this area and in our state just didn't want to discover what they knew was going on there, because they would have to take action. And politically, it's not pleasant for a politician to have to close down an abortion clinic. So it went on for many, many years. And the only reason he really even got discovered was because, in addition to late-term abortions, he was also dispensing drugs to many young people. So he really got discovered because the police went in to find out about the drugs, and then they found all of this other horrific types of things going on in there. So that was a very sad time in our Pennsylvania history. There's a syndrome called post-abortion syndrome. This is a grandmother. I took my daughter to an abortion clinic many years ago, and now I am so sorry, because this was her own flesh and blood, her grandchild, that she helped facilitate that abortion, that she does regret. If just one person had told me not to get an abortion, I wouldn't have gotten it. So many women, you don't know how many women tell me this. That was a quote from Kristen Hawkins' Students for Life. And the sad part is, again, we're not judging any woman that has ever had an abortion. We know many are coerced by parents, by grandparents, by boyfriends. They're told by the media. The whole abortion industry is targeting your generation to let you know that this is going to solve all your problems. But it doesn't. It creates new problems, lifelong problems that you can never recover from. Women do regret abortion, and there is all kinds of post-abortion support. Post-abortion support and recovery groups for women exist all over the country. I regret my abortion is the common phrase. There's a Project Rachel. There's another group called Rachel's Vineyard. This is from Maya Angelou, a very important and well-known poet. I'm telling you that the best decision I ever made was keeping that baby. Yes, absolutely. Guy was a delight from the start. So good, so bright, and I can't imagine my life without him. Rosario Dawson, she's somebody that you may have heard of. She's a really well-known actress in Hollywood. She stars in some movies you might be familiar with, Men in Black 2, Sin City, Rent, and many more. My mom was planning to get an abortion when she was pregnant with me. She was at the clinic waiting for her appointment, and she felt me move in her stomach. I always tell her it was probably gas. I thank God for gas. Post-abortion pain triggers. These women, they never really recover for this. They might disguise it and think, you know, why can't I be like everybody else? But down in the depths of their soul, something is haunting them. Some of the triggers that bring this out are the birth of a subsequent child. They're remembering the child that they didn't allow to be born, and they're thinking, this child that I'm having now would have had an older sister or brother. Anniversary dates of the abortion or the due date. You can't help but count ahead for 9 months after you find out you're pregnant and figure out when that due date would have been. Learning the details of fetal development. Breaking up with the father of the aborted child. And sadly, this happens all too often. Holidays, Mother's Day, Father's Day. And then everyone has their own set of triggers based on their memories of this past choice. And some women try to disguise it with alcohol or drug abuse, or just fill their life with all kinds of other things so they won't have to think about it. But these organizations that help post-abortive women are phenomenal, and they really, really do talk to you about it. A lot of them, they let you name your child, write a letter to your child. There's all kinds of forgiveness available, not only from the heavens, of course, God is so merciful, but also sometimes just telling people the truth instead of trying to keep it inside, festering for all these years, can really change your life. Abortion and men. Those who oppose the abortion experience an immediate helpful feeling. Because men...
Helpless, you said helpful.
Oh, I'm
Take it
sorry.
again at the top.
Abortion and men. Those who oppose the abortion experience an immediate helpless feeling. Men instinctively know they're supposed to be the provider and mostly the protector, but they don't stand up. It's the 23 of those 46 chromosomes are there. Maybe their mother would love to be a grandmother. I have a son. I know if at that point in his young life, if this situation happened to him, I would welcome that child. A mistake has been made in timing. Maybe that's what these people have convinced themselves of. But for heaven's sakes, this baby would be welcomed into many families. It's been happening since the beginning of time. So believe me, a lot of unplanned pregnancies happen. Those who are neutral are not actively aware until years later. They might not even realize what their stance is on abortion until later when some of these triggers happen to them and they start to realize, oh my goodness, what did we do? The triggers an ultrasound experience when waiting for the birth of another child. They happen to experience great anxiety. There's overprotectiveness, emotionally distant. Relationships frequently do not survive, and later infertility, they wonder, is this guilt? Is this punishment? The men suffer just as much as the women do when they realize what's happening and what has happened. Some of the alternatives to abortion are organizations, Birthright International, Cora, just the Helpline, Catholic Social Services, just to name a few. There's Alpha Pregnancy Services, Bethany, Amnion, Pregnancy Resource Clinic, Morning Star Maternity Home, Hope Pregnancy Centers. Thank goodness now there are more agencies out there helping women than abortion clinics. Our baby survived his abortion appointment. That's why it's so important if you can be in front of an abortion clinic, if you're pro-life and you want to do your part. If you bring a brochure that has some information. In fact, today everybody has a phone in their hand with the internet and everything that the internet has to offer. It's just so easy to speak with women, tell them that you're there to help them, maybe escort them to a local pregnancy center in your area. This couple, they had someone, they told them that they didn't have to do this. They were making an impulsive decision and that there was help out there for them and for their family. There's also something wonderful that has happened in the last few years. It's called a safe haven participant, where years ago you used to hear these stories about babies being left in a dumpster, or maybe it was discovered that a child had been buried and people happened to come upon it and were just horrified. But the sad part is, as a young woman in a panic, she doesn't know what to do. So this safe haven law allows you to take your baby and bring it to a hospital or a police department or a fire department. It's important that you give it to someone in that department that is definitely affiliated with that organization. Make sure you leave the child with a person that is allowable. Don't just leave it with a visitor at the hospital. But if you're too nervous and you're so afraid you're going to be discovered, what you could do is bring the baby to the hospital, give it to somebody with a badge or somebody that can accept this child, and then just call and let them know what you've done, that you've brought this baby to the hospital. And you will not be charged with any charges. You simply are trying to do what's best for this baby and allow that child to live. Abortion alternatives. Where would the world be today if Steve Jobs' mother was pro-choice? Think adoption first. And Jack Nicholson, he's very well known. I don't have the right to any other view. My only emotion is gratitude, literally, for my life. If June and Ethel had been of less character, I would have never lived. These women gave me the gift of life. He was raised by his mother and his grandmother. Born to a mother who did not know the father and raised with the help of his grandmother. Adoption, the loving action, again. Being adopted was the biggest blessing of my entire life, and that was said by Colin Kaepernick. And a beautiful picture of his adoptive parents. Dave Thomas's foundation, you've all heard of Wendy's, for adoption has helped more than 3,400 children get adopted. Michael Orr, he was a lineman for the Baltimore Ravens and now the Carolina Panthers. His adoption story was told in the movie The Blind Side. And he didn't get adopted till he was, I think, probably 17 or 18 years old, but it changed his life forever. Golfer Bubba Watson. Every day I try to get better as a father. It's like golf. I guess it takes practice. Hugh Jackman with Oscar and Ava, their adopted children. Mariska Hargitay with Amaya and Andrew. Actress Sandra Bullock with Louis and Layla. 200 years ago, William Wilberforce campaigned on behalf of slaves who were not treated as human beings. Today, society does not treat the beginnings of human life as persons who demand our respect. Abortion is widespread because people do not consider the unborn to be worthy of legal protection. That's a quote from the great-great-grandson of William Wilberforce in his 2008 endorsement of personhood. So these are so many things that we've tried to give you to think about. There's so much more that we could tell you. We have a wonderful website at Pennsylvanians for Human Life that you can go to. We also have links to many, many other websites that are a tremendous wealth of information for you. So just try to really think about some of the things that we've said today and try your hand at asking people what their view is, and then try to see if you are able to defend your stance on being pro-life. It's good practice for you. And the only way you're going to really get better at it is to get out there and try it. And it's the most important issue you'll ever discuss with anyone, ever. And you may end up saving a life. Thank you so much for joining us, and I just wish you the best. And just for review, here's a few questions to think about. When does human life begin? When does the unborn have a unique set of fingerprints? When can a woman have an abortion for any reason? What is the informed consent bill? What is one of the post-abortion pain triggers? And what is one of the alternatives to abortion? Here's a few true or false questions we'd like you to think about. At the moment the nuclei of the father's sperm and the mother's egg unite, a new and unrepeatable human being comes into the world. Do you think that's true or false? The baby's heart starts to beat by the 3rd week. A baby's brain waves can be recorded during the 2nd month. Is that true or false? In the 3rd month, a baby has its own unique set of fingerprints. At 3 months, a baby can tightly grasp an object placed in the palm of its hand.